that date. And on the agenda today is the Eleanor Slater Hospital. We'd like to review an overview and the current status of the admission and discharge practices and the compliance with federal standards and medical standards. I believe we have about 13 to 15 witnesses signed up, but we'll get to those folks in a minute, and we will let Dr. Catherine Power go first. Before we begin, Zaire's going to take attendance. Go ahead, Zaire.
Okay, hello. Chairwoman Serpa.
Here.
Rep. Casimiro.
Here.
Rep. Norre.
Here.
Rep. Agello.
Here.
Rep. Baptista.
I saw him. He's around. He's here.
Rep. Carson. Whip Chippendale. Okay. Rep. Courtfriend.
Here.
Rep. Donovan.
Here.
Whip Edwards. Rep. Villela.
Here.
Rep. Handy. Okay. Rep. Hawkins. Rep. Knight.
Here.
Rep. Lima. Rep. Messier. Rep. Newberry.
Here.
Rep. Place.
Present.
Rep. Slater. Rep. Solomon.
Here.
Rep. Speakman.
Here.
Rep. Williams. Okay, that
And
concludes.
Rep. Baptista came in.
Oh.
Okay, everyone, before we begin with Dr. Power, I'd just like to make a very few brief opening remarks. I think the Senate hearing, the Senate Oversight hearing, I think they did an outstanding job of hearing some of the grievances and complaints that got us to this place at Zambarano and Eleanor Slater Hospital. I think we all know that these problems did not develop overnight, and to the administration, Dr. Power, Dr. Cerbo, and Dr. Daley, in the interest of turning a new page with a new administration, while we have the authority to swear you in, I would prefer not to, and I will not do that with the expectation that we will have honest and open testimony today, and that the communication that we begin today will be ongoing. Because if we continue to get word, and I'll call it the underground, via the underground, that what we heard today was less than honest, unfortunately, I will have to resort to swearing not only you folks in, but other administrators in the future. So to make this an easy slide for everyone, I'm just going to let you know that I expect honest testimony today. And I want this to be an open door to better communication among ourselves and this administration. Everyone knows that Governor McKee was as much in the dark as anyone under the previous administration. I think there was very little that was shared with him when he took this seat over, when he took the gubernatorial reins over. I think he was just thrown into it with very little preparation. So it's going to be incumbent upon all of the administrators and all of the departments to communicate honestly and openly with him, as well as with us. And the other remark that I'd like to make is based upon the news stories that have been covered very, very well by both social media and by the Pro-Joe, it's pretty clear, at least to me, that the problems that we're facing are the result of the lack of unified plans. From my perspective, it just appears that there is no one voice speaking out of BHDDH. There's just not a unified plan, and I think this is what, for Zambarano and for Eleanor Slater, and I think this is what has caused such mayhem among the patients, their families, and frankly, the staff, who are all stakeholders in any new initiative that is embarked upon. And again, Dr. Power, since you are the director, I think it's incumbent upon you to direct the people who serve under you that you all need to speak with one unified voice. We're getting information that somebody gets an email from this director that says one thing, somebody else gets an email from another director that is in direct conflict with that, and I think that's part of the problem as to why families are reasonably upset with the plans or the lack of plans for their loved ones. So I may have more comments, and I will have some questions, and I certainly want the members of Oversight to ask questions. And as I can't say it enough, please be honest with us. If you don't know an answer, please don't feel compelled to make something up. And if a member asks you to get back to them with an answer to a question they posed, please do that, because that's been a problem in the past too. Members have posed questions and they've been promised responses, and the responses never come. And frankly, that's very annoying to us, as you can imagine, when you ask people who work for you to get you an answer based upon one of your directors and you don't get a response. So I think it's fair that this honest communication has to work both ways. I'm more interested in resolving this problem. The stakeholders are first and foremost the health and the well-being of the patients at both facilities, peace for their families, and a sense of security for the families that their loved ones will be in a safe place, if not at Eleanor Slater or Zambarano, and the staff members who dedicate their lives to these fragile populations. So I know I'm sounding like a broken record, but that's the way I would at least like us to begin. And I want to have healthy, open dialogue. So, Dr. Power, I'm going to let you go first. Welcome. And this is probably your first official oversight hearing, I think, Dr. Power?
It is.
Okay, Dr. Power,
Yes.
why don't you begin?
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And first of all, I'm not a physician, I'm not a doctor, but I wish I was sometimes, but I'm the director of the Department of Behavioral Health, Developmental Disabilities and Hospitals. And it is my first time to be invited to talk with you on the Oversight Committee, so I appreciate that. And I particularly appreciate your opening remarks and the sentiments regarding honesty and transparency and making sure that we have a working relationship going forward. And certainly, I think we have a strong reputation for following up with members of the committees that we've appeared in front of and making sure that we give you as much information as possible. What I was going to do tonight is just make a very few opening statements and then turn to a short presentation similar to what I did in front of the Senate Oversight Committee to talk a little bit about the background and the movement around the hospital. I think your comment about the fact that there are various voices and various opinions about the future of this hospital is absolutely accurate. And part of that is that we have to build a better picture about what we need to do in the future. Joining me for our meeting is my Deputy Director, Dr. Cerbo, and my Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Brian Daley. They are definitely doctors, and I'm appreciative that they are both here with me. We also have other staff available if I have a question that I just can't answer, and we will try to get it to you and the rest of the committee as soon as possible. I think I want to start off because of the amount of information that has been going on within the media, and I'm not sure they've done a really great job in the media in terms of telling the whole story or following particular rumors. I want to, first of all, dispel completely the rumor once and for all that we plan to close the Zambarano campus. Far from wanting to close that campus or those buildings, this new administration has included more than $60 million in their fiscal 22 budget for the construction of a new facility on the grounds of Wallem Lake. The building that we're currently in is close to 80 years old, and there is no planned shadow closing of Zambarano. And frankly, I don't know how that rumor started, so I want to make sure that we dispel that immediately. Also, over the last 24 to 36 hours, there has been a fairly difficult problem that came about as a result of the fire marshal's visit to Zambarano and to the concern about the fire marshal's visit that indicated that there was a problem with the med gas system. That's the system that delivers oxygen throughout the hospital, particularly to some of our oxygen-dependent patients. So we started to take a look at what we might have to do if, in fact, DCAM declared that we had to shut down the system. So we have been trying to look at what are potential plans if we have to move some of the patients out of Zambarano over to the Reagan campus where we have a med gas system that is fully functional. We are still having conversations with an engineering firm, with the med gas company, and with DCAM to make some decisions about what we need to do as the next steps to ensure that, first of all, that oxygen is flowing appropriately to patients, that the med gas system is fully functional and is not having gaps, which seems to be the problem right now. And we want to be sure we're making the right decision about whether or not our patients are totally safe and have access to oxygen. And if in fact that's not the case, we would have to remedy the situation by moving them to the Reagan campus and then fixing the problem at Zambarano and then moving the patients back. So we are literally, as I speak, still dealing with that issue. And I think it's a sign of the kind of precarious daily issues we deal with in many of these aging buildings. I strongly believe that as the director of this department, and by virtue of being the director of the department, I have a role as the governing body of the hospital. That sort of comes with the territory in terms of the statutory obligations. I know that you all know that we want to continue to make sure that you know that we really put the patients at our hospital first and foremost in our decision-making. The needs of the patients at this hospital must drive the decisions for their ongoing care. And I think that the care and treatment decisions will always be made on the basis of what the patient needs to be well and to thrive. I've always said personally in my work that no one should live their life in a hospital. With new medications, with new care coordination, and with group homes and assisted living opportunities, there's absolutely no reason why most individuals can't live in the community, as long as they have the desire and they are deemed to be able to survive well with a comprehensive discharge process and that they have the level of care and supports that they need. The plan that we offered to the General Assembly Finance Committees last fall, and what I'm going to talk about a little bit with you tonight, does exactly that plan. We assess what our patients need. We're offering an opportunity to support ensuring that patients get continued care and are safe and are well. Decisions on discharge from the hospital are made in exactly the same way, by determining what the patients need in consultation with their guardians, in consultations with their families, and using that determination to understand what kind of care and support that they need for their long-term well-being. I'm going to ask my Director of Strategy, Ryan Erickson, to put up the PowerPoint presentation, Madam Chair, and I'm going to walk through, hopefully, information that everyone has indicated they would like to see in terms of where we're going in the Eleanor Slater plan and what our trajectory is, and hopefully moving forward with the support of the current administration and with your oversight. So Ryan, we'll go to the next slide. This is the overview I'm going to do. And again, I'm not going to take a long time. I just want to touch on some of the points so that we have a picture of what I confronted when I came back into this department. Many of you may know that I used to lead this department from 1993 to 2003. and then I went and worked for the federal government. And I came back to this department in January of 2020. So I've been here just a little over a year. And it's a wonderful department to work at, and I'm really proud to be here. So Ryan, the next slide, I'm going to start with an overview of the Eleanor Slater Hospital. I think it's important that people know that the way in which Eleanor Slater came to be was that we currently have a license that's known as an LTAC license. The LTAC license means that it's a long-term acute care hospital. And generally, we serve patients with psychiatric and medical diagnoses. And that includes people who are very complex, that may have traumatic brain injuries, they may have intellectual and developmental disabilities, they may be ventilator dependent, and they are, I think, complicated patients. We have a very long history here at the state. The state hospital was originally established in 1870, and we went through many, many, many iterations. And many of you are probably familiar with those iterations. And finally, in 1994, there were 4 separate facilities that were brought under the umbrella of what was then called the Eleanor Slater Hospital, obviously in recognition of Mrs. Slater's incredible leadership across the healthcare system. And those 4 hospitals were then called the IMH, the Institute of Mental Health, Ladd School, Zambarano, which was the former tuberculosis sanitarium, and the General Hospital. Those 4 hospitals are what were combined to make the Eleanor Slater Hospital in '94. The way people came into the hospital were admitted through either the forensic system, which means they are ordered by the court into the care of the hospital, or if they are non-forensic, they could not be served in either a nursing home or a group home. So there was no other place in the community for them to go, and therefore we would receive those medical patients who were not forensic. Prior to 2020, the hospital really did not have what I would consider to be a very robust discharge process. And what that meant was that over the last several decades, it meant that the people in the hospital were really here for very long-term stays until the end of their life. And just to give some perspective here, the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services guidance looks to an LTAC licensed hospital for a typical length of stay in an LTAC between 30 and 90 days. So an LTAC is supposed to be a hospital that receives people coming out of acute care hospitals and stays for a longer period of time for acute care. That's where the long-term term comes in. So if long-term acute care means an additional 60 to 90 days. So you can see from this chart that given where the component parts of Eleanor Slater are, we have on the left side, we have 2 campuses, one in Cranston and one in Burrillville. There are 4 buildings that are important in terms of that makeup: the Benton Building, the Adolph Meyer Building, the Reagan Building, and the Zambarano Building, which is really the Beasley Building. So in each of those buildings, we have particular populations. The Benton Building is totally forensic psychiatric. That means that these are the people who come to us from the court. I do not control the flow of people coming from the court. The court orders them. And generally, we are restoring people to competency for them to stand trial. We're doing an enormous amount of psychiatric interventions and supports. But again, they're all court ordered. And they do not leave the hospital unless they are court ordered to leave the hospital. But there's a lot of patient flow moving in and out of the Benton facility as that moves forward. So you can see we have an average length of stay at the Benton facility of anywhere from 0 to 12 months, which means people are moving in and out of the criminal justice system and using our hospital as a part of their dynamic. The Adolph Meyer Building also has forensic psych patients. We also have other psychiatric patients, and the average length of stay there is 12 years. The Reagan Building has medical and psychiatric patients and a ventilator unit. The average stay there is 11 years. And the Zambarano unit is a medical unit, totally medical unit, not psychiatric. And the average stay there is 16 years. So overall, across the hospital, we have 190 patients in 230 licensed beds, and the average length of stay is 13 years. So let's go to the next slide. What is driving some of our issues here in looking at the patients and in talking with patients and their families is that we are supposed to be following the guidelines of the Americans with Disabilities Act and the guidelines of the Olmstead decision. And for those of us that have been working with disability law and in disability issues for a long time, these are two of the largest drivers around looking at institutional care. The Supreme Court held in Olmstead that people with disabilities have a right to receive state-funded supports and services in the community rather than in institutions. And that Olmstead interpreted the ADA integration mandate, which required public entities to administer services and programs in the most integrated setting appropriate to the needs of the qualified individuals. And basically, the original Olmstead decision was centered on patients who were in psychiatric hospitals. And then later, it was applied to all state and Medicaid funded institutions. So we really want to understand contextually within the healthcare landscape what, in fact, we should be emphasizing in terms of developing community-based alternatives to long-term institutionalization that may not be required. And that once a person no longer needs what is known as a hospital level of care, the state has to work with that person to support the discharge to the least restricted environment. And that's really one of the driving forces in terms of the way we're looking at the current patients. And the next slide. So it's important for people to know that we are an accredited hospital. Eleanor Slater is accredited by the Joint Commission. So the Joint Commission last came to survey the hospital and accredit us in September 2017. At that time, there were certain deficiencies that were found, which is not abnormal when the Joint Commission studies a hospital. And there were notable findings that talked about the presence of ligature risk. That basically means that there are physical structures on which people may harm themselves, and the JACO has been very concerned about inpatient suicides. So they're looking at the structures to make sure that they're safe and that people can't harm themselves within those structures. So because we have some very old buildings, we have a lot of ligature risks. And so the Joint Commission took a look at some of our buildings, and basically we have remediated some of the ligature risk by making sure we have 5-minute staff checks. So instead of having a reconstruction or a rehabilitation of the buildings, which is not happening, we now have staff checks every 5 minutes to make sure that people are staying safe. So in 2017, we were given a preliminary notice of denial of accreditation, and then we had 60 days to remediate the findings. And then the Joint Commission came in and accredited the hospital retroactive to 2017. And generally, you're on a 3-year cycle. So in the fall of 2020, we were expecting a JACO visit, but COVID happened. And the Joint Commission suspended all of their accreditation visits, and they have just now started to go back into a regular routine of visiting the hospitals that would have been scheduled except for COVID. So we're expecting literally, and we were expecting them in March, now it's April 1st. So we're expecting them literally, I think momentarily, to show up and do another accreditation visit. So next slide. Madam Chair, you talked some questions about our discharge process. And so this really goes in some detail about that discharge process. Because there hadn't been a more routine process for assessing the level of care and discharging the non-forensic patients, we started to take a look at what was the length of stay And in fact, we were not doing the kind of discharge planning that any hospital should be doing. That is, the day they come into the hospital, we should be starting a discharge plan, no matter how long they're going to stay. So that we didn't have that in place. I also might add that we don't have any electronic records. We only have paper records. So even people who have been in the hospital for a very long period of time, we have just simple paper, and that's actually, gets in the way of our being able to have a much more sophisticated operation. So in 2020, we began to assess the level of care for the patients that we were serving. And we wanted to understand what was the original diagnosis that brought them into the hospital, what was the ongoing care that was being delivered to them in the hospital, and what were the circumstances under which they might have an interest, or their families might have an interest, or there might be an appropriate placement for them in the community. So we had a very, very, a long period of time where we tried to get a clear discharge process set up. So we have conversations with the mental health advocate, with disability rights, with other stakeholders to make sure that we were processing things appropriately in terms of what's available in the community, what are the reasons why people need to stay in the hospital, et cetera. And so we are working on a daily basis, on a patient-by-patient basis with families. So we want to be sure that whatever discharge occurs, it is in fact agreed upon by everyone. And if there's any disagreement, that there is an opportunity for the patients or their families to make sure that they have an appeal right through the Medicaid office, and make sure that they have the right to say they have a reason why they would like to stay in the hospital. And we'll go to the next slide. Oh, and on the right-hand side, I'm sorry, Ryan, go back one. Just on the right-hand side, this just gives, we were asked at some point about what did it look like in terms of the patient inflow and outflow across the last 3 years. So this is, 2.5 years. So 19 and 20, this gives you a picture by building, basically, in terms of the discharges, the natural deaths that have occurred from our patients, and then the patient outflow.
Director Powell, can I just interrupt you right there 1 minute, and I don't want to get off on a tangent on questions, but Representative Place chomping at the bit, so I'm going to make an exception and let him ask his question. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Director Powers, did you just state that there's an appeals process?
Yes.
Okay, so I have a question. If the Olmstead Act is designed around the patient requesting the discharge, why do you need an appeals process on behalf of the patient? If the patient is supposed to request the discharge.
The Olmstead decision is basically encouraging that any institution that has individuals in it should be encouraging, any state entity or any authority that runs should be encouraging community integration. And so if we should be, as a state authority, encouraging community integration, but we have individual patients who do not want to be discharged, or who have a conflict with, or their parents don't want them, or their guardians don't want them to be discharged, there's a process that they can appeal that decision on our part. In other words, our physicians and our social workers who have said, we think this person is dischargeable, there is a process for them to appeal that through EOHHS.
So I'm going to read from the Olmstead decision, if you don't mind. States are required to place persons with mental disabilities, again, we understand that it was originally based on mental disabilities, in community settings rather than institutions when state treatment professionals have determined that the community placement is appropriate, the transfer from the institution care to a less restrictive setting is not opposed by the affected individual.
Right.
So why is there even an appeal? I mean, if they oppose, if the affected individual is opposing the transfer, or if the guardian is opposing the transfer, why is there need to be an appeals process?
Well, it's interesting because we understand from the Medicaid authority that we needed to have an appeals process. No one has appealed a process. We have basically said for people who want to stay in the hospital, that they will stay in the hospital. So we've had no one experience the appeal process yet.
So is that in line with what you announced to patients, when you're planning on announcing to the families today, that if they don't agree to the transfer down to Cranston, that you'll place the patient on hospice care?
I don't understand what you mean. What am I communicating today?
All right. So my understanding, so what you said is you're going to allow the patient, you're going to give the families the opportunity to have a say in the discharge. Is that the same say that you're going to give them when your department is planning on telling families that if they oppose any transfer to the Cranston campus, that you're going to place their patients on hospice care and put them in the most comfort position? Because that is what your administration either has or is planning to do with the 22 patients up at Zambarano right now. So if that is what you call giving a family an option, I think there's a problem there.
Well, I think that there's some misinformation here. First of all, we haven't even talked to anyone yet about whether or not and under what circumstances we may move people still under the hospital operation. And there's not necessarily an equation between Olmsted and the appeal process, because the appeal process only relates to, one second, my computer's not working here for a second. The appeal process only is in existence for individuals who would be discharged. We're not discharging people from one campus to another at this point in time. We are considering, if we have to, because of the med gas system, to transfer temporarily a patient from Zambarano to Reagan in order to make sure they have access to oxygen if it's not available. And so the patient safety, it's the move to Cranston is really not related to Olmsted at all. So I'm not quite sure where you've made that connection.
It's related into the way in which your department communicates with these patients' families. So if thank you, Director. If you're telling a family that the patient needs to be discharged, are you going to do the same thing you're doing right now with the transfer? Are you going to tell them, well, if you don't accept the discharge, we're just going to put your family member on hospice care? I mean, that's the correlation, because that's what you're doing right now to the patients, or planning on doing to the patients up at the Zambarano campus today. This is coming from your administration. The option the family members will have is either transfer to Cranston or be placed on hospice. Are you going to offer them the same option? Are you going to offer the same option?
Where that information is coming. I don't know where that information is coming from. First of all, we haven't communicated.
Your doctors, Director. That's coming from your doctors.
Representative Place, let's let the director answer your question, your first question. Go ahead, Director.
So I think that there seems to be some confusion, and I apologize if there's any confusion. What we're trying to do is to understand whether or not we have to move patients from one campus to another in order for them to have connectivity to appropriate oxygen supply. There's nothing else that's going on, and that decision has to be made in the next day or so that we can understand that DCAM can go in, the engineering firm can go in, look at whether the med gas system is effective. Then we will know whether or not we have a safe environment to continue to treat those patients. I'm not discharging anybody to hospice or discharging anybody to the street. If there is a transfer, that is very different in terms of patient safety. So I would like to proceed. So I think now I'm going to just ask Mr. Erickson if he could move to the next slide, which will continue the discussion about the discharge process. And I know he is going to do this right. So here we have the people that the hospital has discharged since, we were asked since July 2020, how many we had discharged. We've discharged approximately 22 non-forensic patients, and these are the places that they've gone. They've gone home, they've gone to a mental health psychiatric rehabilitation residence, they've gone to a nursing home, they've gone to assisted living, and they've gone to a developmental disability group home. Absolutely no patient was discharged against their will. For patients that have a guardian, guardians were also in agreement with the discharge. If the patient is deemed competent to make their own decisions, their desire to discharge, when in line with the physician recommendation, is what's acted upon. And in addition to the 22 discharges, 4 from Burrillville and 18 from Cranston, there have been 14 patient mortalities since July 2020. And so you can see the grid here, we've described how people and where people have gone in terms of the discharge. Now I'm going to move on to the next slide to talk about what the consultant proposals were given to us, which in turn then I related to both House and Senate Finance Committees last October. So the consultants delivered a report outlining the potential redesign scenarios and their respective financial impact for the state. And we testified before the House Finance and Senate Finance on those proposals. The 3 scenarios that the consultants developed were, 1, the first scenario was to close the Zambarano unit, close the Reagan unit, close the Adolph Meyer unit, license the Benton facility as an independent forensic hospital, and develop the capacity in the community for high acuity patients to be served in the least restrictive settings. The second scenario they offered was to close the Reagan building, close Adolph Meyer, license Benton as an independent forensic hospital, and then redefine the Zambarano campus as a mixed-use, long-term care facility for populations that the existing continuum of care does not serve. And then the third scenario that they suggested was to maintain the status quo. That is, we were going to close Adolph Meyer because we need to get out of that aging building, to maintain the Reagan building, maintain the Benton facility, and maintain the Zambarano under our existing licensure. These proposals were given to the former administration. The former governor chose scenario 2. And so we have been operating on that premise that we would eventually close the Reagan building, close the Adolph Meyer building, license Benton as an independent hospital, redefine Zambarano, and in fact, Governor McKee's administration, as I mentioned in my beginning remarks, has put in $60 million to renovate Zambarano so that it will become a facility that can then meet the needs of the people that need to remain in care of the state, depending upon their level of care. So in all of these scenarios, there was a clear direction that we needed to find out who should be in the hospital, what's the level of care we should be delivering to them, are they meeting a hospital level of care, or should they be in a different kind of facility? And that's exactly what we've been doing over this last year. And we're, again, trying to do what we believe is the best for all of the patients and for all of their families. So the next slide. So, Madam Chair, this is to me one of the most important pieces of information about our journey and our transition. We at the department recognize that there are tremendous gaps in the current continuum of care, in the current healthcare landscape. There are tremendous gaps that keep people basically in the hospital because they can't immediately transition into a different kind of environment. So we've started the process of talking with EOHHS and with Medicaid to develop the continuum of care to support people in their most appropriate and least restrictive settings. What is very interesting to me is that we actually asked people in the hospital Has anyone ever talked to you about being discharged? Has anyone ever talked to your family about being discharged? These were discovery processes. People had never actually had conversations with folks. And so we began to understand that there was an expectation that once they were in the hospital, they would stay there for a very, very long time for the rest of their life. And so we wanted to be sure that people understood that there were some options possibly for them if they so choose. So we're trying to work with EOHHS to do some capacity building grants for nursing facilities. Most nursing facilities, even though that's a level of care that we're delivering at the hospital, they don't have the expertise to deal with individuals with intellectual or developmental disabilities, or the expertise to deal with traumatic brain injured individuals, or the expertise to deal with more complicated behavioral health psychiatric conditions. But there's an interest on their part to become more capable in that area. So we're working with Medicaid to look at building the capacity within nursing facilities to do that. And we're also trying to work with the stakeholders who are out there operating some of the community providers to make sure that we enhance some of those opportunities. I was here when we closed the lad school. We moved hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, people that no one thought could ever live outside of an institution. They are all living in community placements today. Every single one of them that came out of the lad school, and all people who have never been in the lad school, but have been intellectually and developmentally diagnosed with conditions that people 50 years ago would have said they will never live outside of an institution. We have an entire developmental disability system that is doing that. And so we want to look across the behavioral health spectrum, like we did for developmental disabilities, and enhance the opportunities for people potentially to live in the community. This, to me, is the most important message of all in terms of anything that I talk about tonight, that we see the need, we see the gaps, we want to be a partner in developing with our other agencies and with our other community partners the capability to make sure that individuals with needs who might be able to live in a community setting get the level of support that they need. Next slide. And we also heard, Madam Chair, that there were individuals that said we were not communicating with them. And I thought it would be helpful for you to know that I think we've worked very hard since I came back in January of 2020 to talk with people about this. And we've had a lot of discussions about the Eleanor Slater Transition and Transformation Plan with a lot of different constituencies. And I think part of your issue about the one voice is that every time we talk with other people, there's people with different opinions. There are people who say, you know, you shouldn't move people, they should stay in the hospital. Or there's people who say there's not the right kind of community placement yet. We have to develop that. So we've tried to engender those conversations, and those conversations, I think, have been important. We've talked with Human Relations and Labor at DOA about what this means in terms of labor. We've talked with union leadership. We've talked with the medical staff. We've had 8 town meetings across the Eleanor Slater Hospital, so that I make myself available, if I can, to all of the people who work at the hospital. We've had a lot of network meetings and different conversations with the Hospital Association of Rhode Island, the Governor's Council on Behavioral Health. So I feel like that we've tried to work very hard, and this is another opportunity today with your Oversight Committee to talk about what track we're on, what we're trying to accomplish, and moving forward and wanting to be, as you indicated, as open and as transparent as we can be. And I think the next slides are simply just appendix information on admission and discharge data. So Ryan, we'll go quickly to just look at the 2 slides. We were asked for a picture of the admission data and the discharge data and where the overall census is moving. And then the final slide is a picture of the rating of the physical condition of the buildings, which really raises a lot of our issues relative to wanting to refurbish and/or get out of particular buildings. And I think that this was a pretty good assessment, given the fact that we want to make sure that people are in safe environments. We want to make sure that our patients are can be cared for appropriately in the environments that they're in. So we want to be sure that we're watching very carefully a lot of the DCAM facilities maintenance and operations work that needs to go on to ensure that the patients are safe. So with that, Madam Chair, I'm going to stop there, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you and to talk with the committee, and very happy to answer questions and hear from your committee members their concerns.
Thank you, Director. Now, are Dr. Cerbo and Dr. Daley doing presentations as well, or are they present to answer some questions?
No, they're here as available to answer questions.
Okay. Well, the first thing that jumps out at me, and it's already been a noted inconsistency in the news today, is that, and I noticed, we have hired 3 consultants, which, if you've been following oversight, is certainly one of the bones of contentions that I personally entertain. To my knowledge, we have hired Mannett, Phelps, and Phillips. We've hired Alvarez and Marcel in one of the handouts today. This one, the Eleanor Slater Hospital transition.
Right.
That is footnoted on the right-hand corner as being from Alvarez and Marcel. And I understand RSMUS has also been contracted to do some work. So why are we paying 3 companies for contract work? Are they necessary, and are they duplicating one another's work? I'm very curious about that.
Well, I'll try to answer to the best of my knowledge. Some of these contracts were in play when I got here, Madam Chair. So there was I think the state had a contract with Alvarez and Marcel that they were doing some work for the state at the time. And I don't know what work they were doing.
They always are, Director.
I'm sorry?
They always are doing some work for the state. So we hear.
So I was, when we knew that we wanted to start taking a look at Eleanor Slater as a part of, I'm sure you remember, Madam Chair, that when I came on board, there was a problem with the Institute for Mental Diseases mix of patients. So the state had stopped billing the prior April, before I came on board in January, and they wanted to start to take a look at what is the future, what is sustainable in terms of what the state should be operating. So they had a contract with Alvarez and Marcel. They said we should extend that contract to have them do some work on the footprint for Eleanor Slater, and in that way, that's how they became involved. I personally will tell you that I was very impressed with the amount of expertise they had, and that they understood a lot about hospital operations from my standpoint. They did a lot of research, looking at other hospital systems across the rest of the states. They gave us a lot of information, and that's actually what contributed to that large document that you just held up, which was that 62-page summary document about what they learned about what kind of hospital we should be looking for in the future in terms of what's sustainable, what makes sense, what's the level of care, where are the actual needs of the future. The other contracts, my understanding is, and I'm not totally familiar with the other contracts, but I think they do not duplicate. I think there were different competencies. Maybe Manat was more of a legal advice in terms of providing to EOHHS the legal advice about the IMD mix, legal advice about Medicare Part D. That was a consultation that was really legal. And then I think RSM US Limited, they are an accounting and audit firm. And from what I understand, they did, and they're continuing to do the work, from what I understand, was that they looked at the rate setting methodology around how the rates were determined. They looked at our chart reviews, and they looked at sort of our performance audit revenue cycle processes, and that they audited some state grants. So I'm not an auditor or accountant, but that's what I understand RSM has done. So to me, in my mind, we had Alvarez and Marcel for sort of hospital operation and hospital systems with some national expertise about that. Manat was, I think, legal advice to EOHHS and looked at not only this department, but also other issues across Medicaid. They had an expertise in Medicaid. And then RSM was really accounting and auditing. That's my best understanding.
So Director, I think for this meeting, we requested reports from the Manat contract, and the department told us that those contracts were protected by attorney-client privilege, and someone in your office said that you're not required to release them, but you could. Is that right? You're not required to, but you could.
Yeah, I don't, first of all, what I know is that the Manat legal consultation isn't considered a consultant report. It's considered an ongoing legal consultation that's proprietary and protected. And we understand that that's what we were told by legal counsel at EOHHS. And they were the ones who handled that contract.
Well,
And I don't have a report from Manat. I mean, what I did with Manat was that I was engaged in conversations with them when they provided verbal legal counsel to some of the questions that the department had about IMD exclusion, expectations of CMS, and Medicare Part D. And those were all verbal conversations.
well, here's my first request that I would like someone to follow up with me regarding. At your direction, please. I would like some clear direction as to the status of releasing in full the results thus far of those 3 contracts. We have a pretty good feel of what A&M did with this 20 or so page
Okay.
handout. So
Yes, ma'am.
I'm frankly interested in what we have so far regarding the other 3, because I know that performance audits are done here in the state, and it's public information.
Well, and the performance audit may be public information, and I will find that out. All I know is what I was told about the Manat legal communication being proprietary. The other, Alvarez and Marcel, you clearly have that. And when the RSM information is available, I'm assuming they're still doing work on some of the performance audit and the revenue projections, but I can check on that, Madam Chair.
Now, the other thing, I've worked with Director Hoyle in some other issues, and he has told me in the past that any agencies that gets state or federal funding is subject to an audit, and the audits are public. So does Director Hoyle audit your department? If you don't know?
Yes.
Okay. So
Yes.
if he audits your department, why do we need to pay another contract to do that work? If you don't know the answer, could you find that out?
Well, I think the only thing I can tell you, and again, I will find out more information, I think we had to understand a lot more information about the rate review methodology. And
The
I
what
don't know
methodology, please? The what methodology?
It's called the rate review
Okay, yep.
methodology. In other words, how do rates get set for Medicare and Medicaid? And how was the level of care that we were delivering merging or meshing with the level of care rate review that goes on for those services? And we needed a third-party review in order for us to understand that. And I think that's my best understanding, but I will get you whatever information I can about what is distinguishable with why we used RSM in terms of the need we had around understanding some of the performance audit processes that were either absent or were going on here.
All right, and the costs of those 3 contracts, please.
Certainly.
And I'm just going to make a comment before I open it up to the committee members to ask their questions. I think you can agree that when these things are shrouded in secrecy, cloaked in secrecy, and information is not revealed, I think you can agree that you can see why the families of some of these patients, and frankly the staff, you can see why they become suspicious of the motives of your department. They become suspicious of the direction that your department is taking because, again, they just feel that they're left out of a significant portion of information. And if I get nothing clear through today, it's just that you need to be the one, and I don't need to tell you your job, but you need to be the one directing the policy and directing what's put out there by the people who work, and I want to say under you, but I think you know what I mean. You can't have your directors and your associate directors freelancing and sending directives to families and to directors at Zambarano. Our Representative Place just showed me an email that he received from, I guess, a doctor with a footnote saying that, if you decline these services, can I have it, please? May I have it, please? If you decline these services, your son, daughter, patient, I'm looking at it in handwriting here, Director. And again, I don't want to call anybody a liar. I don't want to get off on that foot. But I'm looking at the directions. Continue with oxygen at Cranston or agree to comfort measures only full code status. I mean, these are his constituents. And if you can email that to the director, I would like her to see it. Again, Director, I'm not calling you a liar. But is that from a medical doctor, Representative?
That was the notes taken by a medical doctor at Zambarano with the instructions given by Dr. Stone.
I would really like to see that communication. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative. I really would like to see it. I have 1,200 people that work in this department.
Yep.
And this is a very complicated issues, not just about this hospital, but about all the other service systems that we're responsible for. And I will certainly try to do my best to clarify what is the policy, what is the program, and I will do my utmost personally to make sure that happens.
Okay, if you could get back to Representative Place, I would appreciate it. Okay,
Certainly.
I'm going to open it up now. Representative Casimir, please proceed.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Director Powers, I know that you just talked to Chairwoman Serpa about the consultants that you're using. We've had issues before with Alvarez and Marsal. I mean, they're the same consulting firm that charged Rick $76,000 per week to become more efficient. Does anyone on this call know how much we're paying Alvarez and Marsal?
I don't know. You mean me? You mean how much I have to pay or did pay?
I know you did, but I know you asked for it, Chairwoman. I'm just very interested in Alvarez and Marsal. So can anyone on your staff who's on this phone call, or can you tell me how much you're paying Alvarez and Marsal for their consulting work?
I think as far as I remember the number correctly, it is $1.5 million for their work.
Did you meet with anyone else besides these consultants on the transfers of patients?
Did I meet with anyone else about what?
Not you particularly, but did any of your staff meet with anyone else besides the consultants on the transfers of patients?
Well, I'm sure there's people on my staff that met with family members or guardians or some of the provider agencies, or is that what you're referring to?
Yes, I'm
Representative?
particularly interested in some of the other provider organizations.
Right. Well, I think we have staff that have met with the nursing home associations and different nursing homes. They've met with the community mental health agencies that run the MHPRRs. They've met with the substance abuse agencies that run the recovery houses. We've met with some of the advocacy groups that have concerns about developing the community capacity. I think there's a lot of conversations that have gone on. I mean, I haven't been privy to all of them or engaged in all of them, but I've certainly had and encouraged that there be conversations with other groups.
Is it true that a physician at Zambarano resigned last night because he didn't want to fulfill the leave your hospital or hospice directive?
I don't know whether a physician resigned last night. I don't know.
Can you find that out for me, please?
I can. I
Okay.
can.
And if the levels of patients drop at Zambarano, does Zambarano automatically get closed?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
If the level of patients at Zambarano drops to a certain level, does it automatically get closed, the hospital?
No, that's why I opened with the statement that we are not closing Zambarano.
Okay.
And if you look inside at the Alvarez and Marcel report about what the Zambarano facility should be, you will see in that report a breakout. As a matter of fact, I think it's on page 25 and 27 of that report, that there is a description of who could be served at Zambarano. So we know we're moving in that direction, and we are not planning on closing it.
What follow-up is done with patients who are discharged?
I'm sorry, what's what?
What follow-up is done with patients who are discharged?
We have calls with the places where people are discharged to. We have the advocates, and we have a follow-up, and I will check in with Dr. Daley to make sure that he can give me a little bit more information about the absolute concrete ways in which we're following up with people.
Okay. If a placement
Yeah.
outside of the hospital is not working out, what is the process for readmission?
And Dr. Daley, you want to take that?
Sure, I can do that. Thank you. Hi, Representative. I'm Brian Daley. I'm the Chief Medical Officer. So the first part of your question was, what sort of follow-up do we do? It depends really on what kind of patient you're talking about. So we have forensic patients who we follow with a newly constructed forensic outpatient clinic. This was an initiative to try to make sure that people stayed from becoming criminalized. It's a large problem in the United States, the criminalization of the mentally ill. That was started over a year ago. And so for forensic patients, we do that. It's been very successful in keeping people out of jail and out of other hospitals. If you're talking about other generalized patients, such as general psychiatric patients or general medical patients, we really have a couple of contracts with some entities that help us to follow patients. We have a contract with the Alliance for Long-Term Care, where we have an embedded social services person. She follows patients that have been placed to find out how they're doing, what we could have done better. In those cases, if there is something that we could have done better. We have, in general, follow-up with insurers, including Medicaid. And we have our own entity, right, BHCDH. So BHCDH oversees many populations, DD homes, et cetera, and so we can also internally find out. I sort of cross over between the hospital and the department, so it's fairly easy for me to keep coordinated with those kinds of things. I work with a person at the department, and we track really placement of sort of all patients. So that's feedback that we can get. And I'm sorry, the second part was about
If a placement outside the hospital is not working out, what is the process for readmission?
So at present, we don't have a process for readmission. The reason for that is because if somebody was discharged, they didn't meet our level of care. There used to be a process, an unwritten policy for readmission to Zambarano for any reason. This would include if somebody went home and the family decided that they just couldn't take care of them, et cetera. So the process right now would be going through a general sort of readmission process that would require standard admission procedures. I should offer that in the time of COVID, that's also extremely important, because if somebody's been out in the community, we don't necessarily have the ability to screen them the way an emergency department would, though we don't want anybody to go to an emergency department after discharge, of course.
So am I hearing that no one has been readmitted?
Not no one, just in a while, I don't know if anybody's been readmitted. I mean, people have been readmitted forensically. The majority of our discharges are forensic discharges. We've had so few medical discharges that I can't remember any. We had 4 discharges from Zambarano last year. All of those placements worked out, I believe. So forensic admissions are readmitted, but that's through the court system. If they reoffend, though, when I led this off, I talked about the forensic outpatient clinic, so that's really cut that down a great deal.
Okay. I want to go back to the follow-up on patients who are discharged, because we all read the story about the woman who set fire to the apartments in Warwick. What kind of follow-up was done there? And I don't need you to break any HIPAA laws or anything like that, but can you give us an idea of why that why that particular patient fell through the cracks?
So I can't tell you anything specifically about a patient because that's protected health information, but what I can tell you is I can give you a sort of general overview of the discharge process. All of our patients in the past year have been voluntary discharges. We haven't discharged anybody against their will. So in order to keep any person in the hospital who was voluntary and wanted to leave, I would have to break the law by keeping them here against their will. So there are cases that people won't have. I mean, it depends on whose measure of success you're using, right? So a patient's success in being out of the hospital for a number of months might be different than what other people's version of success is. I really don't know who would be measuring those things. But, you know, if you think of a medical patient, there are diabetics who are discharged from the hospital all the time. They may have to come back to the hospital. They may not take their insulin, et cetera. It's just really with the mentally ill that we tend to, as a society, and I don't mean to say anybody here necessarily, but we tend to, as a society, think that we should have kept them in the hospital if they have any sort of non-success by whatever sort of term you're using.
Dr. Daley, do you know about a physician who resigned last night because he didn't want to enforce the leave or go to hospice rule?
I received an email late last night from a physician that said that she wanted to resign. She did not give me the reason. So I don't know that it is due to that. So I do know that she wanted to resign. I've spent a large portion of the day trying to get in contact and email that physician to sort of discuss this matter and sent her a great deal of things. My suspicion was that she was resigning because of some of the rumors that were flowing around, and I did not want that to happen. I wanted her to be fully informed before she made that decision. So I haven't heard back yet, but that was late last night, and I've spent a good portion of the day trying to get in contact.
That's something I would really like to have you get back to us on, if that's true, that's why that physician resigned.
Sure.
I don't want this question to just like be asked and then we don't get an answer on it.
No, I'll do that. And in the emails back to that physician, I said, you know, I really want to sit down with you and know what's going on. And if that's your choice, that's fine. But please, I would like to sit down. And so I didn't hear back from her yet today, but that is what I said in the email. So I'm expecting to sit down with this physician myself. I was down in Cranston today and I didn't get the chance.
Thank you.
Other questions from members? Representative Place?
So I'd like to go back to discharges and things of that nature. We're going to hear from a doctor later on testifying that he was told that there's supposed to be 100% of the patients discharged from Zambarano last summer. And unfortunately for the administration, they weren't able to do that. That's just the focus of where I'm going with this. If anybody, who's most familiar with the PM1 form involved up there at Zambarano? Dr. Daley, are you familiar with the PM1 form?
I'm somewhat familiar with the PM1 form. PM1 form is a Medicaid eligibility form that's filled out that helps facilities that you might be referring someone to know if they are their level of care, a place you might send someone to. And so you usually use it if you're trying to send an application to a nursing home, et cetera.
And who is supposed to initiate that PM1 form?
There's a portion that's filled out by a physician. There's a portion that's filled out by
It wasn't my question.
worker.
Doctor, that wasn't my question. Who initiates the form?
Sorry?
Who initiates the form? There has to be a process. Someone has to make a decision to start filling out this form. Who is it that is supposed to initiate the form?
Any member of the treatment team who is starting to talk about discharge could initiate the form. In general, when you're dealing with a patient, you want to start the discharge process. I mean, when you don't have patients who live in a facility, you start the discharge process fairly early. And so you start a PM1 form pretty early in the process. Some of our patients, it was started, of course, quite a ways after their admission, but it's usually initiated, I think, by a social worker.
All right, so are social workers allowed to, and I'll quote the instructions, your patient is applying for services from the Department of Health and Human Services. That's the first line of the instructions for the PM1 form. So does the patient have to be the person applying, or their primary guardian? Or can the hospital initiate this form without the authorization of the patient?
I think it depends, but I'm not altogether certain of the answer. I just haven't filled one out myself, Representative. I'm not trying to be evasive, but you're reading from the form and I don't have it in front of me and I don't know it that well.
All right, so move on from there. Now, have you recently changed, as the Department of BHDEH recently changed their policy on that P1 form from having 2 doctors, MDs, signing the form to eliminating the need for a second doctor and allowing other medical practitioners to sign other than a doctor?
I don't believe so. I think that one doctor is all that's, I mean, it doesn't have to be a doctor. It has to be
If you'd like, doctor, I can send you the memo. I can send you the memo that your department distributed informing your employees that no longer required 2 doctor signatures that other medical professionals can sign, if you'd like. I can send you that memo.
Okay, that's fine.
All right.
I mean, I don't know what you're referring to. I think that Medicaid generally makes the requirements of who fills out the PM1 form, so
All right.
I might have to check with them, but I'd be happy to take a look at that.
So how many doctors have left the service of Zambarano in the last year, to include the resignation you mentioned this evening, or was mentioned this evening?
That doctor has not left, so I still have hopes that she won't, but we'll see. And 2 doctors have retired.
And was
And a
any,
physician, I'm sorry, a physician was laid off earlier.
all right, did any member of any person, either you or someone below you, pressure any of these physicians into signing PM1 forms that they found to be inappropriate?
I don't believe that that's the case, no.
Thank you.
We may have asked people to fill out PM1 forms for patients because they needed it to, determine their level of care and if they had eligibility, but nobody has pressured somebody to fill out a PM1 form that I know.
So it's just a coincidence that 2 of your doctors, now very close to 3 of your doctors, have resigned from Zambarano, and you guys have changed the requirement from 2 medical doctors down to 1. Just a coincidence. Thank you, doctor.
So 3 doctors have not resigned, 2 retired, and 1 resigned that I'm still trying to see if she'll stay.
All set? All set? Okay. And any other questions from Representative Casimiro?
I have a question. The list of agencies on the transparency portal, BHDDH doesn't seem to be one of them. You can search the expenses for other agencies, but why not BHDDH? Alvarez statewide doesn't show up as BHDDH. Can you tell me why?
I have no idea.
Did it go out to bid? Was that something that went out to bid, or was it just another RIC deal?
That one doesn't have to, I don't think.
I have no idea. We'll need to look at that. I have no idea how to answer the question.
Okay, thank you.
I think, Representative, from one of our other hearings on contracts, that's on the short list of ones that they don't have to go out to bid, so we use them as ad nauseum. And I think I read somewhere in one of these comments that contract was over $1 million. Just that one was $1 million.
Over $1 million, it doesn't have to go out to bid?
Did I read that in one of these? Yeah, $1 million just for that one. Representative Falella?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I just noticed a little bit of a conflict on the Eleanor Slater handout that we were given on the communication slide. It says there on Section 2 there, 18 union leadership meetings have been held, including Council 94. However, we received something in our packet today that Council 94 said they've come, they've tried to come to the table and they haven't had any communication. Lack of communication, lack of negotiation, unresolved questions about billing. So I just thought that would be something to bring up to the committee and maybe they could respond to that. Thank you.
Well, I personally have had conversations with the head of Council 94. I have personally had conversations with Dr. Cerbo and other members of the union leadership. We have 11 unions here at the department. 8 of them are involved with the hospital, and I clearly have had an opportunity to have a conversation with them as we were looking at the transition and transformation plan, and we take their calls whenever they have a question, and it is simply not true that we have not communicated with them.
Thank you.
Okay. Representative Slater, did I see your hand up earlier? No, you're all set. I'm just going to make a comment because I've said it publicly before and I'll say it again. These outside consultants to tell us what we need to do, how we need to improve, how we can come to economies of scale, they don't know us. They don't know the inner workings of a building, of a hospital, of a college, of a university. The best stakeholders are the people who do the day-to-day work, and I just don't understand why we don't tap into their potential. Decisions are made, and then they're told, your job is going to be terminated, your job will be consolidated, you're moving here, you're moving there. Take early retirement. And I think this is what frustrates people. There's just no one plan. And when plans do come out, or half a plan, like these A&M plans, it's just so frustrating to me. Yeah, Alvarez and Marcel, no bid contract, $1,540,800. $1,541,000 to compose a redesign plan. That's just unbelievable to me. Totally unbelievable. Maybe it's just me. I'm sorry. Maybe I live in a different world. I don't know why we need them to tell us how to do business. Representative Knight?
I think it's worth noting, Chairwoman, I share your concerns about the contracts because we've talked about it at all kinds of our oversight meetings. I strongly suspect that the statewide, administration-wide use of contractors is a byproduct of years-long, if not decades-long, hollowing out of the state workforce over time, and the General Assembly is complicit because we write the budget. We have just shaved away the state workforce, getting rid of expertise, not filling senior positions, and letting them go by attrition, all in an effort to save money. And it's something that we have to revisit and think about, because if we want a state government that works, we have to hire good people, we have to train them and give them career paths so that they can have thriving careers inside our state government and provide that expertise. Because I think it's appalling that we have to go out to these contractors to tell us exactly how the Medicaid reimbursement system works when we should know that.
And I'm going to use the word, in my humble opinion, it is pure piggery to not use our own existing expertise. It's not a pretty word, but it's piggery. And I don't, it's one of those things, you can put a lipstick on this piggery and tell us that it's a way to do business more economically. I'm just not buying it. And Rep. Knight, I think you're absolutely right. We have gotten into a rut, not we personally, but administrations prior just got into a rut of using and overusing. And people have contacted me personally, people from the inside. You know, they'll say, Rep. Serpa, I offered to do that work for a few extra hours and a few extra dollars of compensation, but I was told no. So Why are we spending hundreds of thousands and millions? And Director Powell, I'm not blaming you. This has been a long-standing problem long before you came back on board, because if I'm correct, you were here before. So I'm not blaming you or either of the good doctors for any of this. I think you inherited this too, Director, right? When you came on board, these 3 contractors were already in there doing that work. Isn't that right? Right?
Yes, as
Yeah.
far as I know.
Yeah, so
Yes.
yeah, please understand, I'm not blaming you or lecturing to you, but every time there's a controversy, there's an outside contractor somewhere in the mix. And, you know, as one of the memos duly noted, it was you, HIP. I mean, that was the debacle of debacles. And, you know, what did we learn? So I actually have a request in to meet with the new governor. I want to share with him some of the things I have learned, and it was recommended to me as well that I meet with the new director of administration, whose last name escapes me at the moment. But I'm going to meet with him as well, because I just want to share what I've learned. I can't change anything. This committee can't change anything. And I certainly did not want this, and I do not want this to be a day of headbanging. I really do want to come to a unified plan to come together and move forward. But, you know, we've got a new administration. I know that they want to do well. They want to serve us well. But we've got to get out of this rut. And other information has come to me about generous donors to previous administrations, and how some of them appear to have been in good standing to get some of this outside work. And I'll leave it at that. I don't have time to do that research, but people who do have sent it to me. And it's not been in a sloppy email. It's verifiable. And we've got to get away from that. But I'm sorry. And Director, please, this is not meant for you. I want you to understand that from the get-go, okay? So please, it's just my frustration again, and you just happen to be the one in front of me, but I know you're not to blame. There's a new administration. I hope it's going to be a new way of doing business for us, for the state, for our patients, their families, and our good employees who come to work every single day and deal with these difficult populations at Zambarano and at Eleanor Slater. And in difficult, I mean as in fragile and demanding, the level of skilled care that they require. I mean, it's just disrespectful to exclude them from these conversations. So whatever you can do to engage them at a higher level, I don't care what A&M says, frankly, my humble opinion, get those folks in. And if what I'm reading here is true, that Council 94 has offered to come to the table with some cost-saving measures, I think that's at least worth a conversation.
I agree.
Yeah, so
I agree.
so the last question I have, Director, is about this money we're getting from the federal government. Are there plans for that money already in place, or are you waiting to see exactly how much comes to the state, and then you'll kind of decipher the buckets? Or does it come to us as categorical aid? Do you know that yet?
Well, and I think you're referring, Madam Chair, to the state plan amendment approval by the Center for Mental Health, for Medicaid Services, which approved a state plan amendment that now will allow us to go back in and determine what level of care we can bill for under Medicaid.
Yes.
So what we're doing now is with that permission, we're now going back in to look at all of the patients that are, first of all, Medicaid eligible, that are getting a medical necessary level of service. What is the level of service, and what can we bill for that? So we are compiling that right now. The OMB had put a number in the budget in anticipation of that. As I recall, the number in the budget was, I think, 6.7 million in the budget. But I don't know whether we're going to get that or whether we're going to meet that. But we're hoping that we can get that process, determine who we can bill for whatever that level was, whether it's nursing home level of care, custodial level of care, whatever the care is for those Medicaid eligible patients, and then we'll have a figure to be able to provide to you and OMB.
So Director, when we can start billing again, that will be for existing patients. We won't be able to recapture maybe patients who have been moved down a level of care or even maybe been discharged. We won't be able
Well-
to, go ahead.
Yeah, we can go back to a particular point in 2020. And at that point in 2020, going forward, whoever was in the hospital at that point, we can determine, did we deliver care to them? So we're going to go back to July 2020, and anyone who was in the hospital that falls into those categories of Medicaid eligibility and level of care, we can bill for even until we stopped. If they were discharged, then obviously when they were discharged, Medicaid is probably picking up the service in another facility. But we can go back and look at those patients.
Okay, very good. All right, if there are no other questions, we do have a number of witnesses lined. Oh, Representative Place? Can this one be quick? Because I would like to move on to the witnesses, if you don't mind.
I understand. I've got a memo from CMS stating that you're already authorized to initiate billing again. And I was just wondering if that has started.
I'm sorry, a memo to authorize what, Representative?
Let's see, you have received the proposed amendment attached 419A of your medical state plan submitted under transmittal, blah, blah,
Right.
blah.
That's the spot.
Yep, so
Yeah.
you have been given authorization to start billing again, correct?
Correct. That's what I was just explaining to the chair, that now that we have permission to bill, want to go back to July 2020, look at the patients, decide who's Medicaid eligible, what's the level of service, and then we can bill.
And I mean this honestly, Chair, my final general line of questioning. So you stated that you aren't closing Zambarano. Is that correct?
I stated that we are not closing Zambarano.
Okay, Zambarano, the unit, or Zambarano, the hospital?
Zambarano is currently a campus unit in the overarching Eleanor Slater Hospital. That's the license figure. If we follow the scenario in the plan that I described today, we are going to get different licenses for different component parts of Zambarano so that we can serve nursing home patients, we can serve TBI patients, we can serve intellectual and developmentally disabled patients, and ventilator patients. Those are the patients. They may or may not need a hospital level of care. Generally, they may need a nursing home level of care, custodial level of care, and those are the licenses that we are going to go after.
And I'm going to close with this. My understanding is that you're closing the hospital, that all of the patients that live there, that have lived there for, in many cases, the majority of their adult lives, you're going to discharge them without their permission, an objection from them. And these folks are my constituents. They're in my district, they're eligible to vote for me, and I represent them. And everything I'm getting from their families and from the employees up there is that your administration's intent is to remove 100% of the patients from the facility there today and replace it with an entirely different facility. So by my definition, that is a closure of the facility. And I think it's atrocious that our state government is taking a Supreme Court decision that was designed to allow people the freedom to leave an institution if they so choose. And we're taking this decision and we're literally throwing them out of their homes. And I find that, it's inhumane, and it's just wrong, and the fact that you can sleep at night, that you've been planning this, is amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that I strongly disagree, Madam Chair, with the conversation that I am moving people out of the hospital unnecessarily. I strongly disagree, and the characterization is totally unfair. And I think that we are going to continue to be a facility, a medical facility at Zambarano, as long as we are reaching the correct licensure and that we're delivering the level of care.
And the patients and their families will definitely have a place at the table when these conversations are had, Director?
Yes, ma'am.
Definitely. We can count on that.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, I would like to get to the witnesses. So do we have Dr., I think I gave you my witness list. Dr. Norman DeSells. Dr. DeSells, welcome. Are you on? Oh, okay. Okay, just 1 second.
Stay on this.
Dr. DeSells, are you there?
Speaking, yes, I'm right here.
Okay, we can hear you now. Please proceed and welcome.
Okay, well, thank you. This is Rep. Serpa, I presume?
Yes.
And Rep. Place, thank you very much for the invitation to speak. I'm Dr. Norm DeSells, the recently retired medical director and physician administrator at Zambarano between the year 2000 and October of 2020. I am a physician. I am a doctor. I'm board certified in internal medicine and a graduate and a faculty member of the Brown Medical School. I devoted 27 years to Zambarano, and I chose to retire several years early because of the administrative behaviors I witnessed at Eleanor Slater. I have been asked to describe the patients at Zam and to provide my insights into what has become a guarded administrative subject. You know, my insights are based on my personal experiences, though, and so really only properly conducted investigations can confirm my words. And I'm here today as an advocate for many of the voiceless and incapacitated patients and their families at Zambarano in particular, but Eleanor Slater also in total. And I would refer members of this committee to my open letter of March the 2nd, published a few weeks ago. When I started at Zambarano in 1987, the census there was about 200, and when I retired in February, it had dipped below 80. In the past year alone, we lost about 20 patients total due to administrative closure to new admissions, the ongoing discharge, and also deaths. The vast majority of ZAM patients come from acute hospitals throughout Rhode Island. I have visited, assessed, and accepted patients from every hospital in our state. We don't admit out-of-state residents, though. Some folks come from nursing homes where staff have realized their inability to meet the patient's medical and behavioral needs. The average patient is in their 40s, so this is a young population.
Doctor, excuse me, go ahead.
Just real quick, I don't know if you're in a bad location, but your phone keeps cutting in and out, and we all really want to hear your testimony.
Okay, could you give me I got another number to call me. So let me talk to the person who connected us, and I will give them another number. I'm right here. I got two phones.
Text the number to Representative Place, and we'll give you a call right back.
All right, thank you. I'll hang up now. Thanks.
Can we just be at ease while we get that? What, Nick? Okay, all right, next caller. Is Jim on the line? Is it Jim Senarini, Nick? Yeah. Hi, Mr. Senarini. Welcome to your first oversight meeting this year, and please proceed while we try to get another number for Dr. DeSells. Please go ahead.
Okay, this is Jim Senarini from Council 94. I'm okay to start?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Chairwoman Serpa. My name is Jim Senarini from Rhode Island Council 94, the American Federation of State County Municipal Employees. We are in strong opposition to the current plan to reorganize the Eleanor Slater Hospital. The fact of the matter is that this plan is ill-conceived, in our opinion, and fatally flawed. I'll go quickly through the written testimony that we've made up and address some points that I've made notations of as we've gone along. First, I would like to address Catherine Power's assertions about regular communication. There is a big difference between talking at individuals and actually negotiating or having a dialogue. Council 94 has tried to obtain some definitive answers, and they've been sorely lacking, or the information that we have been told has changed. Specifically, we were told prior to the release of the new reorganization plan directly by Director Power to our union presidents that there would be a path forward for both the Zambarano unit and the Cranston campus, specifically the Reagan building, to go forward. Instead, when we were presented with an actual copy of the plan, everything had changed, and now the plan was to close two buildings on the Cranston campus, the Reagan building, which is the most modern building in the Eleanor Slater campus currently, and the Matthias building, the AM building, the Adolph Meyer building, which does have some serious structural issues. But those answers have constantly changed. One thing that I would point out in addressing the billing is that Director Power was here and took credit for the rate methodology and at that point the state plan amendment that allowed for the billing to go on for over 20 years that included forensic patients and civilly committed patients and medical patients. And I find it I'm always trying to figure out what really changed that suddenly, first we go out of the IMD mix, which means that we could never have more than 50% of psychiatric patients, and if so, we would become an institution for mental disease, an IMD, and make us ineligible for funding. But first that occurred, and then all of a sudden, it was announced that we were just suddenly going to stop billing. If you look at page 2 of Council 94's testimony, we specifically encouraged the committee to ask for copies of the legal guidance provided by Manet, Phillips, and Phelps, and also the accounting audit that was done by Ernst & Young. The reason being is we've been told, we have not been able to obtain copies, but we've been told that these two documents, in essence, do not support what the department is putting forward, that they had to stop billing Medicaid. One concern that Council 94, and we hope that we're wrong, is that it appears that the department and that the agency, Buddha, is refusing to start billing. And what we hope is not happening is that they are trying to starve the hospital or trying to trip the IMD mix by ceasing all medical admissions. We keep on asking these questions, and again, the answer is closed. One thing that I think was brought up in the Senate hearing that is very important to note is that everything that's being done right now is not, it's all about closures in service reduction. And one thing that just makes absolutely no sense is that they're not talking about building up a continuum of care that is necessary for people who have serious reoccurrences of mental illness. That whole issue is being ignored by this department, and instead we're pursuing a plan to radically alter the structure of Eleanor Slater without having adequate replacements. One other thing that Council 94 is aware of is that there's an alleged breach of confidential medical information, that individuals at the hospital may have taken certain patients who are on ventilator units and provided their information, their medical information, in an unredacted manner to a private vendor and a private provider. I know the department has what they think is an answer to that. We still have a concern about the way in which it was done. I would just also note that Zambarano, unfortunately, has had two recent structural issues, one impacting the kitchen, one impacting the oxygen delivery system for some of their patients, and some of their patients may be moved to Cranston temporarily. It may be fixed. I just want to note that it makes zero sense to close the Reagan building, which was built around 1976, and it is the most modern building, again, in the facility campus that may have to house patients. There's already been a lot of dialogue about Alvarez and Marzal. I would just point to you that one of our labor economists did a whole workup on there, and their whole study is problematic, and that's detailed in the handout we provided the committee. I would also like to add that Local 1350, which represents many of the direct care staff at Eleanor Slater, is our most ethnically diverse in the group within Council 94, and they are very fearful of not only what is going to happen to the patients that they've spent years and years of caring for, especially during COVID, but also for their own livelihood. I would just like to close with one thing that we keep on hearing that a lot of the discharges were successful. Council 94 has learned that at least 5 were not successful. I personally spoke to a mother of one of the patients who was discharged, and what's very upsetting is that when people leave Eleanor Slater, in any continuum of care, there should be escalation and de-escalation, but what I'm hearing from certain individuals is that once they're out the door, that door is closed to come back. I would urge Governor McKee to really look at this plan. I believe, again, it's a problematic plan developed by a previous administration. I think that this should be done again, and a new pathway should be created so both the Reagan building, the Benton building, and the Zambarano facility can get a path forward. And that we actually had a plan on the books dating back to 2014 to build a new hospital. And they also were talking about doing medical records since 2014. I took a look at all your great fiscal staff's analysis for the last couple of years while I was waiting to talk. Thank you so much, and I'd be happy to answer any questions to the best of my ability.
Thank you, Jim. Representative Place?
Jim, real quick question. Have your members, or have they relayed any information? This is an honest question. We haven't had this conversation ahead of time, so I honestly don't know the answer to this question, unlike the other questions I've asked so far. Has any of your membership relayed to you pressure by the administration to discharge patients inappropriately?
We have heard some of those concerns, but what we ended up doing is following that trail to talk to other individuals at the Cranston campus. And I believe specifically pertaining to the ventilator bed units, I just talked to one family member today who has a loved one there and was extremely upset because they felt that their loved one was really being attempted to forcibly move to a different facility. But I have to be careful with some of the words because while the person was comfortable in talking to me, they asked for me not to identify them publicly. So
I can understand that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Representative Casimiro?
Hey, Jim, how you doing?
great. How you doing, Rep?
Good, thank you. I have a constituent who's in touch with me almost daily about the situation with her husband at Eleanor Slater and the threat that he might be getting moved to Zambarano, where he is not going to, he's going to be far away from home. He's going to be, the facility's not set up to accommodate his needs. She told me that there were like really crazy things happening at, off hours, files were getting transferred, kind of like shady things that were happening. Is there any truth to those rumors?
So I can tell you that I've talked to a number of individuals. I believe the department will contend that the transferring of those files was appropriate. I don't share that opinion. As far as the move to Zambarano, one of our chief concerns when it comes to the ventilator beds is that being located in Cranston, they are very close to acute care hospitals, and medical transport that can accommodate their needs is basically available 24/7. One of the concerns that has been conveyed to me is it could take up to an hour if the vent beds were moved up to Zambarano, for instance, just for sheer geography. It could take a while to get transport there and transport to an acute care hospital. So I've heard that concern from different family members.
I'll just make one comment. The fire departments up there are fully equipped to handle EMS transport, advanced life support. We have 2 ambulances that are within 10 minutes of the Zambarano campus. So while the commute obviously geographically is there from the Zambarano campus to the nearest hospital, the fire service and the EMS up there is top notch, and again, they're within 10 minutes. 2 ambulances fully equipped with advanced life support are within 10 minutes of the campus.
And because we've, I just want to say, Jim, because we've mentioned the oxygen, the med gas a couple of times tonight, I did call the governor's office today. I spoke to his legislative liaison, and he said that the governor's office has just contracted with an electrician or a contractor to repair that system to make it fully functional again. So
That's actually very good to hear.
yeah, Director Power, you know, I want to believe that what you say is true, that those patients will not be transferred out of that facility. So once they get the oxygen readjusted or whatever they need to do to it constructionally, that those patients will still have Zambarano as their home. So, okay, if there's no other questions of Jim, thank you, Jim. I'd like to bring Dr. DeSalles back. Do we have Dr. DeSalles on the line? Dr. DeSalles, are you there?
Yes.
Let's see if we can hear you now. Let's try again. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, this is Dr. DeSalles. Yes, I'm the recently retired medical director from Zambarano. I worked at Zambarano for 27 years, and I chose to retire several years early because of the administrative behaviors I witnessed at Eleanor Slater. I'll skip a little bit and get to the vast majority of the patients at ZAM come from acute care hospitals throughout the state. I have accepted patients from every hospital in our state. The average patient is in their 40s, so it's a young population, and the average length of stay is months to years. Overall, the Eleanor Slater patients are divided between 2 units, the psychiatric folks in Cranston and the medical folks at Zambarano, with the exception of the ventilator unit in Cranston, which is there for safety reasons. For 20 years, I evaluated patients for admission to Zambarano. Only 25% of applications were admitted. Those who were admitted suffer from permanently life-altering conditions, traumatic brain injury from gunshot wounds or from accidents, spinal cord injuries, degenerative diseases such as multiple sclerosis or Huntington's chorea, brain injury due to opiate overdose, those we've had a significant increase in, quadriplegia and dementia with aggressive or self-injurious behaviors are just some of the examples of folks who came to Zambarano. And also at Zambarano is a provider of advanced wound care for patients with debilitating pressure ulcers and bone infections that were acquired in other facilities. Most of them do not have the physical or cognitive capacity to self-preserve or to self-advocate, and most cannot speak, and I'm here for those folks. Zambarano cares for 3 distinct groups of patients. Number 1 is patients requiring acute hospitalization. These number fewer than 10 on most days. Number 2 group is patients who do not require acute hospitalizations, but whose needs cannot be met at the nursing home level, and this is by far the largest group. Number 3 is patients whose needs could be met in a nursing home, but whose circumstances preclude acceptance by them. And I'll give you some examples in a moment. The majority of patients discharged from Zambarano go to nursing homes. This can occur after the reason for admission is resolved. For example, their wounds have healed. The other scenario is that they get worse, and they can no longer benefit from Zambarano services. For example, they have repeated strokes and are no longer able to participate in rehab, and that also makes them eligible for nursing home placement. Other patients are discharged to group homes, and these are folks usually with non-psychiatric behavior problems caused by their underlying medical conditions. And nursing homes are not able to accommodate these folks because they're verbally abusive, they're physically aggressive, they're young adults, and they pose harm to other residents. Our goal is to find the proper therapeutic mix of activities, therapies, and medications that permit their success in a group home. If they fail, though, we have always taken them back. It is the only responsible thing to do. However, I know this is no longer the case, as some folks have read in the Providence Journal. Rare patients go home with family because they require 24-hour care. Even with access to all available community resources, success with family is difficult, infrequent, and usually short-lived. Similarly, failed home placements have always been readmitted, presuming, of course, that patients still need care. They've always been readmitted under my watch because it is the responsible action to take. The alternative is for the patient to go through an emergency room and become frozen in an acute hospital bed. Since this is no longer the case, retaking patients back is no longer the case under the new administration, failed placements must go to other states for long-term hospitalization. The services at Zambarano simply do not exist in Rhode Island nursing homes. This is intentional, and it was driven by patient needs. Young trauma patients, which is really what we've been getting, young overdose patients, could not receive a regular program of physical, occupational, or speech therapy in a nursing home, nor could they receive respiratory therapy, which is essential for many. Care for debilitating pressure ulcers and bone infections do not exist. These services are vital if these young adults are to have any hope of returning to the community. Now, in contrast, there are numerous Zambarano patients whose needs could indeed be met in a nursing home. No doubt about it. These patients, however, have circumstances that preclude nursing homes accepting them. And some of the examples I have here are combativeness, undocumented immigrants, sexual behaviors, suicide attempts, murder convictions, lack of a legal guardian, the need for court interventions, and setting fires. Those are some of the real-life reasons why many are not accepted by nursing homes. And while it is true, and the director is correct, that this group of patients does not require a hospital level of care, Rhode Island does not have the intermediate level of care between nursing home and hospital, which they require. I refer to this level as, I call it a nursing home or a group home on steroids, is what I call it. The result is that these folks are forced into the least restrictive environment in Rhode Island, which Rhode Island offers to accommodate their needs, which ends up being Eleanor Slater. Sending these patients to other states for their care would adversely impact Rhode Island families for sure. In the spring of 2020, hospital administration usurped, took over the normal patient discharge process and imposed its control over the standard multidisciplinary team process in an effort to expedite discharges. The hospital's interests had taken over the patient's interests by hijacking this discharge process. Their efforts, however, failed because physicians could not responsibly sign discharge documents for patients who did not have safe discharge options. When Jennifer White, acting CEO at the time, called to press me that, quote, 100%, unquote, of all patients needed to leave, I repeated the lack of safe discharge options, to which she replied, quote, then they can all go home, unquote. In my professional opinion, converting Zambarano to a nursing home is a fool's errand for Rhode Island, in the absence of appropriate pre-existing alternatives. It may lift the hospital's budget to safety, but it will throw voiceless, vulnerable Rhode Island residents overboard. It would be an injustice to the majority of Zambarano patients whose needs cannot be met at the nursing home level, as well as to the people currently frozen in acute hospital beds statewide. A nursing home would not only provide less needed care to medically complex young patients, it would also obligate physicians to transfer some to out-of-state long-term hospitals, such as Vibra Hospital in New Bedford, a relatively new LTAC hospital. If physicians cannot access the care patients need here in Rhode Island, they will move them to that care in other states. Rhode Island residents requiring long-term medical hospitalizations are currently frozen in hospital beds statewide because no nursing home can meet their needs. Some of these patients belong at Zambarano. Eliminating Rhode Island's only long-term medical hospital may be one step forward for this administration, but one giant leap backward for healthcare in Rhode Island. If the ultimate goal is to eliminate long-term care hospitals because they are too expensive, then a thoughtful plan to integrate patient needs with providers in the community must occur before Eleanor Slater is closed, not after. Smooth transitions of care can then move forward, and this is the only responsible path. Yesterday's abrupt administrative decision to move 23 patients from Zam to Cranston, invoking an oxygen issue as reported in the Providence Journal, is concerning. This problem has been known by administration for years. As an update to that article, I'll answer one of the questions asked a little while ago. At 7:15 last evening, a contentious conversation transpired between Dr. Andrew Stone and Dr. Betty Gillerin, a Zambarano physician for 24 years. Dr. Stone attempted to persuade Dr. Gillerin to transfer Zambarano patients to Cranston, quote, for their safety, unquote. She resigned, quote, on the spot, effective April 14th, 2021. I continue to learn every day about administration gaslighting the staff and the public via Randall Edgar, while in reality, gutting Zambarano of staff and direly needed services, and forging forward with irresponsible actions that put the safety of current patients at unnecessary and preventable risk. Staff are prohibited from speaking freely because of the threat of termination. The diversion and limited visitation caused by the pandemic allows administration to dismantle Zambarano in stealth mode, so to say, without disclosure or transparency. And if I would suggest that this committee hear from acute hospitals where long-term medical patients are now frozen. 2 weeks ago, the Senate Oversight Committee heard from administration that patients should not live in a hospital because it deprives them of life skills. We heard that the average Zambarano length of stay is over 12 years, while CMS guidance estimates the typical length of stay as less than 90 days. We were reminded that the Olmstead Act requires that both medical and psychiatric patients be offered community-based care of their choice, rather than care in institutions. We heard administration acknowledge gaps in community services needed to fulfill the Olmstead Act. I agree with all these points. What we did not hear from administration is why the hospital is in its current situation. In 2019, CMS cited the hospital for its lack of a mandatory computerized health information system, a self-inflicted wound a decade in the making. To make matters worse, the hospital fell out of compliance with the IMD exclusion. The consequence was the loss of the hospital's ability to apply for and obtain federal reimbursement of care. In February 2020, shortly after a still undisclosed CMS audit, at least that's what they were calling it, a CMS audit, I learned that administration had developed an abrupt urgency to stop all admissions and to discharge 100% of the patients. The reason given by CMO Dr. Brian Daley was financial, quote unquote. Administration proceeded to impose unrelenting pressure on physicians to discharge patients and sign forms, despite the lack of a safe discharge plan. At this point, the hospitals and the patients' interests had dangerously diverged. Administration struggled unsuccessfully to ensnare doctors in what we viewed as potentially nefarious actions. Dr. Daley's repeated comment that, quote, there's nothing nefarious going on here, unquote, was not reassuring. Meanwhile, some administrators acknowledged a shared fear that CMS would find billing errors in their audit and demand repayment for overpayments stretching back years, potentially placing the hospital in financial peril. Potential insolvency begins. Potential insolvency begins to explain the aggressive and dispassionate administrative actions that place hospital interests above patient interests, invoking a narrow interpretation of the Olmstead Act. To disguise financial calamity by obfuscating in countless ways that Zambarano patients are the root cause is vile. We are witnessing unconscionable irresponsibility that directly and adversely affects patients. 2 weeks ago, we saw glimpses of the A&M report. Both Senate and House Oversight Committees need to know that this report was developed by Eleanor Slater administration in Cranston only, and only administration. Virtually all administrators were new hires at the time. Most had never heard of Zambarano, and none sought Zambarano input. Only one administrator, Dr. Brian Daley, a psychiatrist, ever met with the medical staff. Only Drs. Daley and Andrew Stone, both newcomers without long-term medical care experience whatsoever, were involved in crafting this vital report. Senior Zambarano physicians, such as myself or others, were not invited or involved in any aspect of this report. What concerns me now about A&M's three-scenario plan is that it does not recognize the greater role of Eleanor Slater in Rhode Island healthcare. It does not account for the medical needs of Rhode Island residents currently frozen in acute hospital beds. It does not account for all three groups of medical patients now at Zambarano who have no discharge option, nor does it account for the lack of community services needed to comply with the Olmstead Act. Converting Zambarano to a nursing home would create a new unmet need in Rhode Island healthcare by eliminating its only long-term hospital. It would also duplicate already overabundant nursing home beds. On March the 26th, the Providence Journal reported that CMS had granted Eleanor Slater permission to resume billing. We also learned that the law firm of Manat, Phelps, and Phillips recommended in early 2020 that Eleanor Slater resume billing. For unknown reasons, billing did not resume. The actions we are witnessing are not normal. They are administrative in origin, they lack clinical merit, and they are not in patients' best interests. They make no medical sense. There are many unanswered questions. 1, what is the unknown force driving such actions? 2, what do they know that we do not know? 3, why are a handful of administrators allowed to unilaterally alter a state-chartered hospital by gutting it into a nursing home without a license or intervention by the governor or the Department of Health? 4, is the conversion of Zambarano to a nursing home actually part of a much larger CMS requirement to forgive the hospital's self-inflicted debt? 5, if eliminating Rhode Island's only long-term hospital is the goal, why is it being done so secretly, urgently, and dangerously? 6, why are high-risk discharge decisions being carried out without provider planning before safe alternatives actually exist? 2 physician layoffs, 2 premature retirements. Yes, premature retirements, and 1 unforced resignation leaves Zambarano with 1 physician total, 1/6 of its medical staff. This is unsafe physician staffing. Administration now plans to eliminate 24-hour in-hospital physician coverage soon, leaving the hospital without any physician on site nights and weekends for the first time in more than 50 years. Zambarano is being forcibly converted into a nursing home on a hospital license. These cost-cutting maneuvers are irresponsible and dangerous. Although eliminating physicians completely would surprisingly not violate any known hospital regulation, it would violate the community standard of care for hospitals in Rhode Island and nearby Massachusetts and Connecticut. Lack of an on-site physician does occur in isolated communities of the United States with provisions for that, but this does not occur in Rhode Island or neighboring communities. Such brazen service reductions that adversely affect patient care signal an administration in desperation. The cost to the state of just one sentinel event resulting from their actions could easily eclipse any financial savings made many times over. I call upon the legislature, the governor, and the Rhode Island Department of Health to exercise their authority to halt the administrative debacle that the medical staff has witnessed, to allow full, deliberate, and thorough investigations to chart the best path forward. And I turn it back to the chairperson.
Thank you, Doctor. I let you go over my usual time for testimony.